Okay, so my model is called the Admae model, and it has 5 steps to it. This was designed to be used in a K-12 setting classroom for project-based learning. It's loosely based off of the Assure model, which has 6 steps to it and is more of a constructivist kind of project-based learning. So that's kind of what it's based on. So the 5 steps are audience, determine objectives, determine materials, assess, and evaluate and revise. So I'm just going to kind of go through them and how I chose to do my project that I for my the project that I designed. So for the audience, I chose second grade. I ended up choosing my second grade class. I decided that I was going to use what I designed to see if it worked. So my class has 22 second graders. They are 7 to 8 years old. Um, what I decided to have them do was research an animal, and then they were going to make a nonfiction book. They were going to write a nonfiction book about that particular animal. So their skill level they had already used because I had them use the computer to research. So they had already used the computer. They didn't have a lot of background knowledge on the animals that they chose, and they had been working on nonfiction books, so they knew how to go about making a nonfiction book. For determining the objectives, I kind of went off a second grade standard. There's a second grade standard that they need to be able to research a topic, and then there's a second grade standard about writing in nonfiction stories or nonfiction books. So I really wanted my objectives really focused on writing the book and how they made it. If it worked well, if they got all the pieces to it, and the other part of my objective was to determine if they could research, how well they researched, how they um, how they could determine if it was a good website, bad website, and so on. So the materials we use MacBook laptops that are shared between second and third grade, and they've already used those before, so they knew well how to use them well. I also went on to Teachers Pay Teachers, and I found a book that had already been pre-made. If I couldn't find one, I was going to make one myself, but I found one that that was really well made. So the book had an all about me page, a table of contents, about the appearance of the animal, a habitat of the animal, predators and prey of the animal, interesting facts about the animal, a blank page for those if any kids needed an extra page, a glossary, an index, and then about the author page. While they were doing their research, I printed out these next few pages in kind of like a packet, and this is how they took their research notes. They kind of had like a web, and so an appearance web, habitat, predators and prey, and facts. So the next part of my model, the Admae model, is to create assessments to assess the student's understanding of the concept. So for this book, it already had a rubric pre-made, and I looked through it and I thought it was well made, and so I decided for the book portion I would use this already pre-made rubric. So it's just kind of right there. They have the animal research report for individual students and then also for groups of students. I let my students choose if they wanted to go with a partner or be by themselves. So those would both work. I made my own rubric for the research aspect, and I made my own rubric for those early finishers. So I guess I didn't. So the early finishers, I had them make a keynote presentation. So I made a rubric on that. So that kind of leads me into the evaluate and revise. So throughout this model, one thing I would change about it would be to make my revise go earlier in the model. So maybe put like an arrow that they could revise at any time at any level. Because by the time I got to the bottom, I realized, oh, I didn't revise anything, and I was teaching this as as I was kind of going through this project. So I was actually doing it, and I figured out that I didn't make a anything for those early finishers, which was, and I don't know what I was thinking. So I decided to, that's one of the things I kind of went back and I revised and said that if those early finishers got done, they could make a keynote PowerPoint. And so I made a rubric for that as well. So, and I kind of evaluated how they were doing. And I think this model worked pretty well for me. The main thing I would change is to make sure that I revised earlier throughout the model, because I noticed as I got to the bottom, I did not do that at all. And so that's one thing I would change. I think for me, this is a project-based model, and I do a lot of project-based things in my classroom. So as a teacher, I think it works really well for me. I just, and I used it for this, and then earlier in the semester I used it for another project similar to this, and I think it's worked really well for me. So there's the main thing I would change is just to move the revise earlier in the model. But other than that, I think it worked pretty well for me. So I think that's the end of this.